I think a lot of us sense that, don't we? A lot of people in the country sense there's something wrong. Not quite sure if we can put the finger on it yet for many people, but and then there's the sense that we need to stand up and do something. Dallin, we missed you. Do you want to?
I'm Dallin Durfee in the physics department. I'm just here to listen.
Dallin's a physics professor at BYU, and glad you could come. I'm going to stand over here, and I'll try to respond to a few things. But which first name again? Scott said about getting to know each other. You see, that is really helpful, and to me, and I'm sure to all of us. And Brian, as we get that email system going, perhaps a forum at some time will become...
I have a forum on my website.
Oh, you have a forum. Would you let us know about that in your...
His websites are excellent.
Yeah. And so if you've signed up that list, or if you email to Brian, then I think that would be a great thing already for us to communicate that way, full of Jesus Christ. So you're not following me, you're following Jesus, okay? and you know, we're all, I hope, in that same vein. And I follow Nephi, son of Helaman. His example means a lot to me right now. I've thought about it a lot. I've had a threat to my career from a fairly prominent, outspoken fellow, San Francisco Bay Area, who emailed me and through his administration at BYU. And he said very plainly, he said, no, he didn't say my career, he said, no one person's career is as important as what's at stake here, which he didn't define. But he was criticizing my work, and so that was fine scientifically. But then I responded to him, you see, to his critiques. But then later he said, I had contacts with Homeland Security and with...
pedophiles, you mean?
And he said, I could get you a very good grant. I could get you a very good grant from, and that sounded pretty attractive. And he has contacts with national labs. I don't doubt that he did. He seemed fairly well versed, but I won't obviously talk too much about his name, but it wouldn't do any good. But he even gave me an idea of what this proposal would look like. But he said, in order to get it, it would really be important if I changed direction in my research. So there is an element there that's quite interesting. And
are you saying they would pay you well?
Yeah, well, that's right. Oh, and so this reminds me, and I just fit in with Nephi. I'm talking about the son of Helaman. And he was, as he stood on his tower, I guess he was kneeling, but he prayed. And the people gathered around and said, what is going on? What's bothering you? And so he said, well, as you read in Helaman 6 and 7, and there he said, well, there's these Gadian robbers, and they're not just out there, people. They were out there, but they're also in our government. And one of them has killed another one, the head of our government. And if you go check, you'll find evidence and, the story. And finally, one of them confessed, which I think is really, there's evidence that we can bring forth. And I've had a small part in that with a number of others. But there, finally, I think the example of the Book of Mormon is that we should pray for is that there will be someone with courage who has inside information to disclose some of this. Now, there are people who are trying to do this at the government level. Kurt Weldon, and I'm just going to talk along here as things come to mind, you see, as best I can, but it's not anything I've organized. Kurt Weldon is actually a Republican out of Pennsylvania. He's heading up the Able Danger investigation, which is an investigation of the foreknowledge in our intelligence agencies about these hijackers, and which I think were patsies, but nevertheless, that means someone set up to do something, and so they could be blamed. The operation would be blamed on Muslims, basically. But anyway, he is pursuing that, and he was recently, was it just last week, I think, in a town hall meeting back east, and he was asked, well, what about 9/11? He says, I've read Professor Jones's report. I thought that was kind of funny. Or maybe it was my talk at UBSC, which, thank goodness we still have the internet, so we have this spreading, that way. That's hard to stop. But there's a good man that we can support, Kurt Weldon, and he is actually conducting investigations on the foreknowledge of the administration, and not just this administration, it apparently goes back at least to the previous administration, and about these the plans to attack, like you said, a Reichstag. Who said that? You know the history, most of us, many of us do, how Hitler used an attack on his own people and blamed it on, Poland, for one, and then they were able to get the German people angry enough to attack Poland and so on. So, and there's a story like that in the Book of Mormon too. This is called the false flag operation. And as people get to know about false flag operations, it opens them up to considering what we're trying to say about 9/11, what many of us are trying to say. And I just want to point out Malachi. It's a great story, but it's a history. And so these quotes that I put together here. You have, let's see, how was that? Malachi wanted to be the king of the Lamanites, remember? And so he got to be the leader of the army, devious methods. And then he sends his servants up to the king of the Lamanites, and they kneel down, or bow down. And then one of his servants, obviously under orders from Malachi, what did he do? Kill the king. Right there it is. Kill the king. And who did they blame it on? The king's servants. And as soon as they started shouting and blaming it on the king's servants, well, they took off. And they ran over to the land of Jershon, and so pretty quick, Malachi says, well, go after them, and they're too far ahead, and they didn't catch them. And so pretty quick then, by blaming this on these servants of the king who went to the land of Jershon, Malachi was able to become the king, and he even married the queen, and convinced her of this lie, which was, a false flag, you see, blaming it on someone else. And then he was able to rally the Lamanites to attack the Nephites, and in particular the people of Jershon. So we have that history. And remember, the Book of Mormon is written for us. And as we read it, we should ask ourselves, why is this in the Book of Mormon? Okay, so I said a bunch of things. The Book of Mormon has been just a great comfort to me, though, I must say, in all of this. As I first started reading this and studying this and seeing the physics of the collapse of Building 7 in particular. Dallin, were you there in September? I don't think I did. At the BYU thing?
No.
I didn't think I cited it, but it was kind of fun. But anyway, when I first started studying this, it was hard to sleep for a couple nights. Because I thought, man, it seems like we must have, I don't know who it is yet, but there's some sort of secret combination, a faction. It doesn't have to be real big, but just like the Book of Mormon is talking about, in our government now. Which means the Constitution is hanging by a thread, because that's what the Constitution is designed to do, is to prevent dictators or power-seeker factions. And yet they seem to have gained enough ascendancy to do an inside demolition on these buildings. So I couldn't sleep for a while. But then 2 nights I had trouble sleeping. It's all because as I started thinking about this and praying about it and realizing, well, it's in the Book of Mormon. This is what happened in Nephi's day. Helaman 6, it's exactly like that. They had terrorists outside and inside their government. And he warned the people. Did they change right away? No. So what happened next? Let's just trace the history just for a minute. So what happened? So he warns them. The warning went out. Do you remember what happened next? Yeah.
Well, I have to say, they thought that they were very righteous people.
They did think that they were.
Because when those men fell dead, as if, because they saw that he was really dead, they thought, oh, we're so righteous that the Lord caught the killers for us.
Right.
So they thought they were righteous people.
They were smug. There's a quote here about being in a cocoon at the last conference. You should notice on the brethren. It's on here. A lot of people live in a kind of a cocoon of self-deception. That's what it is. Cocoon of self-deception. That was Elder
Stone.
Which number? Somebody.
Elder Stone.
Elder Stone. Thanks. It's quoted.
Well, this was really the only occasion in scriptures where a prophet solves a murder mystery.
Right. True. And it's very interesting how that happened, isn't it?
And all of the elements of this particular situation, where there were 5 people who went to the murder scene, and they were arrested,
right,
and thrown in jail. All of this, and then later on, Nephi is given the sealing power.
That's right. That's correct. And then what happened after that? Remember? What did he pray for? Because that's exactly right, Vanya. The people weren't repenting and cleaning up the government, so he did actually pray for a famine. And because the people, there's so much violence. Obviously, the Lord doesn't like violence. And this is a reminder we can pray for a resolution of some of these problems. And I think that's one of the main things we need to commit to is to pray, each of us. And
so one of the main points of this is that he was a prophet who declared to the people who the secret band was. And because of this, there was a great amount of pressure applied to the members of the church, persecution.
That's true. So
because of this. Because he declared to the people who the secret band was.
Right. Did all the people accept Nephi then? No. Did they all reject him? No. There were some that accepted his warning and some that rejected. Let me just carry on for a minute about a quote of President Hinckley. Sean pointed this out to me. Sean Manford. It's point number 1. And this is in the Ensign of last August. Now read it this way where you're thinking about what's really going on. See if it doesn't sound pretty good. The Book of Mormon, I'll just read parts of it. And I'm sorry, again, I can't imagine we need this many handouts, but there are 45 out there. The Book of Mormon narrative is a chronicle of nations long since gone. But in its descriptions of problems of today's society, it is as current as the morning newspaper and much more definitive. Maybe we can, Brian, I'll send this to you, maybe we can get some other people these if they'd like to have it. And just coming down, the people succumb to the wiles of ambitious and scheming leaders who oppress them with burdensome taxes, who lulled them with hollow promises. These evil schemers led the people into terrible wars. I was referring to the Book of Mormon, but remember he said it's as current as the morning newspaper. Now, did Al-Qaeda burden us with burdensome taxes? Did they lull us with hollow promises? No.
Who was Al-Qaeda until 9/11?
Yeah, that's right. And then at the priesthood session, and I quoted this, I just wrote it down because I was listening to President Hinckley. He said right near the start of his talk, we are involved in terrible wars. And so again, that before in August he's talking about the Book of Mormon people, but saying it relates to our day. And now he says, today we are involved in terrible wars. And so I think that President Hinckley has a lot of insights, but you just have to read it, what he says. I don't know quite how to say that. I think he's telling us what we need, and preparation and so on. Yeah.
Has the brethren talked to you about your efforts?
No.
Has the administration of BYU talked about your influence and reception?
Very little. The feedback, there is some feedback from BYU. It's a fair question. And the dean of our college, very good man, and our chair, also a good man, had talked to me a few times, like 3 or 4. And the main concern is that they don't, it's a question of getting into the media, the press. This is why the dean was pretty clear, it's better if you don't give live interviews and that sort of thing, or too much media interaction. Stick with the scientific seminars as much as possible.
And very wise counsel.
The
That
media
sounds
is-
like an endorsement to me.
That's right. It turns out to be
They never make you look
counsel.
good
That's certainly
unless you're on their side.
very much the case. I've learned that.
Well, that's quite encouraging to feel that.
On the other hand, they have been allowed me to continue with the science, and I am presenting a paper. It's just a 15-minute paper tomorrow at the Utah Academy of Sciences down in Ephraim. And I will be talking there about recent research that we've done with students, and that's permitted too. So, but we have. Well, let me just tell you about that. Someone asked about the physics. So this is the latest, and what we've seen now. There's several videos of molten metal pouring out of the south tower just before its collapse. In other words, within about 3 or 4 minutes of its collapse, particularly starting about 2 minutes before it collapsed, and right at the point, as you look at the video, where there's twisting and failure, right there is where this molten metal comes out. Now the molten metal is yellow-white in color. And furthermore, just before you see this metal pouring out, there's a white, it's called a fire in the National Lab, the NIST report. But it's, anyway, it looks kind of like a fire, but they say it must be a metal fire. Could be. Some kind of very intense chemical reaction to be white hot like that. With white, they call it smoke, but it's a dust that comes off of this. So the question is, what is this? And that's what we'll be talking about tomorrow. This is discussed mostly in the NIST report. It's kind of in an Appendix H, I think it was. But it's there, and they have photos. To their credit, they say, here's a question. We're not quite sure what this is. It's interesting. It's obviously important because it's right where the building starts to move, finally. And just before it fails. So, but they say this yellow metal coming out is probably, first they rule out molten steel. And sometimes you'll hear this still on the radio today, or recently, someone told me that they said, I don't follow it that closely, but they said, somebody called in and said, well, it's just the steel melted. Well, there's several arguments which I'll raise tomorrow, but the main one against that, of course, the National Lab scientists have looked at that. The fires did not get anywhere hot enough to melt the structural steel. That's number one. Number two, the NIST commissioned underwriter labs to do actual tests on models. These are floor assemblies for the tower, and actually model them and then subject these to very severe fire endurance tests. Well, the steel did not melt in any of those tests. And in fact, and this also is in the report, the floor assemblies, the models, they couldn't even get them to collapse. See?
What kind of loading were they?
They were under significant load. I mean, this was a model, and they explained that.
So it was appropriate for the strength of the material they were using.
Yes,
the
they
model.
tested all that. I mean, this is carefully done, and the intensity of the fires was, well above what we just expected to happen. So, I mean, they pushed it, but and they say the loads. It didn't fail. Now that's an important point. The actual models, and this is in my paper, but maybe I need to emphasize this a little more, is that the models did not fail. They didn't melt, but they didn't even warp enough to fail. You see what I'm saying? And so those experiments have been done. There was no melting. So what is this yellow hot metal coming out? Well, in the NIST report, they say, and it's said as a speculation, this perhaps is the airplanes, or the airplane, not too far away, it was maybe 100 feet away, that melted, and the molten aluminum made it over there. It's a little hard to imagine, but nevertheless, and then the floor gave way, and the molten aluminum came out.
Where was this located on the tower?
It's on the north east corner of the tower, about floor 80. Have you ever seen molten aluminum?
I have. I've
What
made
color?
one.
You've made molten aluminum in air or in?
It was actually, I didn't see it when it was molten.
Oh.
I found the disaster the next morning.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Well, we did experiments. So we did experiments with Wes Lifforth, you know Wes, and we in a steel pot, and we melted aluminum, and of course Wes is very experienced, and John Ellsworth also said it doesn't turn yellow when you get it hot under daylight conditions. Now in the dark, so let me just explain a little bit. Molten metal will, like in these incandescent lights, when you heat a metal, they incandesce, they glow. And red is about 600 centigrade. I have to use centigrade. Sorry, I can't remember all the Fahrenheit conversions of that. Yellow is about 1,000 to 1,100 centigrade. Steel melts at 1535, structural steel, approximately. Depends a little on the yellow. But anyway, so it's way above yellow hot where it melts, and way above what you get with fires. Fires get up to about 1,000 centigrade, but that's just the fire, not the steel. It takes a long time to heat the steel. So back to the aluminum that these guys are surmising is coming out of this building. The trouble is we did experiments with Wes, it doesn't turn. The pot is red hot now as he's pouring it out. The aluminum's still silvery. So I said, well, heat the pot up. You know, use an oxyacetylene torch and heat the pot up. We got it up to yellow white hot, the pot, and inside the aluminum was still gray, silvery gray. That's right. Have you worked with molten aluminum?
I've worked at Geneva. I know all about melting metals
Yeah.
and what temperatures they
Good.
they go at. I'm a
See,
welder.
this is great.
I'm also a
I'd like to have
contractor.
you look at this paper as we work on it a little more. But anyway, so then I said, well, Wes, let's try this. Put your torch right on the aluminum. Let's heat this right up, you know. So for about 40 seconds, that's a little scary. But it didn't, I mean, you know, you don't know what it's going to do.
Gas on melting aluminum.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have aluminum oxide peel off in layers as he's doing that. But the aluminum throughout this process stayed silvery gray. It never looked yellow hot. And I said, well, if you did that to steel, oh yes, it would be yellow hot easily within this time with this treatment. But the aluminum continued silvery gray. So the point is, it's not aluminum coming off of there. And another point is, if the aluminum melts about 600 centigrade, which is red hot, but it would still look silvery. But the aluminum is not going to wait there while you heat it to yellow hot temperature. You know, it's a plane. If there's heat source, it would flow. As soon as it melts, it flows. It's not like it's in a pot where you're. And even if it wasn't a pot, it wouldn't look yellow and gray.
It's like mercury. When it gets up, it's just like mercury.
Yeah,
Heat
it
up
looks
like
just
mercury.
really quite like, that's good point. Mercury, you've seen that silvery. So we ruled that out. And we did some other experiments too with the molten aluminum while we're at it. But so what is it then? It's not molten steel. It's not molten aluminum. Well, it turns out that it fits this white reaction, the smoke, this white dust coming off, and then followed by this yellow-white metal dripping out of it. It fits just what we see with a fairly well-known chemical reaction. Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Thermite.
Hey, that's right, thermite, or thermate. Thermate has sulfur added. And if you look at it's fairly well-known, thermite reacts aluminum powder, which is necessary to have that reaction proceed at any decent rate. And it takes a high temperature to get started. Once it gets started, it just goes. Thermite is 2,500 centigrade, white hot. And off comes this aluminum oxide dust, and the reaction's white hot, and then out of that flows this steel. Well, I'm sorry. So it's iron. It's molten iron is the end product. So basically, the aluminum is pulling the oxygen away from the iron oxide, and you get molten iron and aluminum oxide dust. It just fits perfectly. And question?
Have you contacted any demolition companies that use
I
thermite
have.
to cut big beams? To
Well,
get some video?
that's a good question. We have looked at thermite, but demolition companies typically use HMX and RDX. These are organic nitrogen-based explosives. Thermite is being studied since '98. There's what's called nano aluminum, which is ultrafine powdered aluminum, and that is explosive when it's mixed with ultrafine iron oxide. So usually we think of thermite as an incendiary, which means it's very hot, but it actually will explode when you get it into this fine powdery form.
Who has access to thermite?
Right. Well, it's you can buy the ingredients. The military studies and uses thermite considerably. It's a very high energy density reaction. So it's unusual for demolition. I asked the demolition expert, have you ever seen, when you collapse a building using standard organic explosives, have you ever seen molten metal? He said, no. Buildings collapsing don't produce molten metal, which was in pools beneath the towers and Building 7. And again, it looks like thermite would be used. There's some reasons why that's a good idea, but...
Do you have an opinion as whether it was explosive thermite that was used, or...
I think all... There's a...
Do they...
In other words, you can choose. By taking the fineness of the powder, you can make it explosive, or make it burn, melt through, so there's no explosive shock, you see.
Okay, yeah.
And there are columns, which I'll show tomorrow, a picture of a column that's cut at an angle. It's very rough, and then there's molten material on the outside face of that column, which is just what you expect with thermite.
How are you saying that the thermite cannot get?
Well, it would have to be planted there. It would have to be...
Wasn't on the original drawings. And
No, this is not something that insurance companies let you put in there.
Pardon me, that seems like a foolish question.
No,
But the point is that those planes hit a particular floor.
Right. So you have to put this. Go ahead, finish your question.
So you're saying that the thermite was on a particular floor, or
No,
several
many floors.
All right, several floors in a section.
Right.
And then it was colluded that the planes would hit at that particular point.
Yes. I asked the demolition expert, can you set off these explosives with radio control now? So you do wherever you want. He said yes. Oh, that's very common right now.
So they could have picked the floor.
You start it where the plane in this case hit that'd be the southeast corner, and so to get the building, well, the northeast corner was quite strong at that time, and so in order to, I'm just speculating a bit here, but because the data really look very much like thermite, but on the other hand, why would you cut that corner? Well, otherwise the building's going to just topple. You want it to go down straighter, which the terrorists didn't want. I mean, why would they want the building to go down straight? All three buildings went down straight. They would just want to knock it over if they had a chance, right? But instead, the buildings went down straight.
Could you elaborate on how thermite would be set? I mean, if you have a beam, an H-beam that's several inches thick, and this charge on the outside, you have to direct the heat through the beam.
Yeah. This is done what's called...
So how does the charge set on the beam, a horizontal beam, or a vertical beam, so that the heat does not just fall off the beam?
Yeah, and it's something I need to study a little more as to exactly how. They use what's called a linear shaped charge, and but I'm not quite sure how they direct it. There is a casing with the opening that faces the beam, and the casing tends to stay integral while you're driving that charge. But in detail, I don't know.
A friend at work says they just weld it right onto the beam.
Weld it on.
Yeah, it's almost like an angle.
You weld this casing
like an
on.
angle iron, just welded on there, so everything's directed that.
And so then it directs it into the beam.
You know, in ballistic missiles, they use FLSC to separate the different stages. When I was in the Navy, we used to work a lot with FLSC that would be made of different things, beryllium and other things.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, so see, right.
It didn't have any direction, it was just.
Yeah, well, in this case,
there.
you can get it to be directional. Now, it takes, you have to have a crew of people with access. And a number of the researchers, I'm working with the scholars for 911 Truth group. And scholars for 911truth.org is one way to get there. But recently, one of the guys had pointed out, and also Jim Hoffman some time ago, but it's being refined, is that it would take a few people in the know, somewhere around 20 probably, for an operation, 10, something like 20 people. And then the others would follow orders. And there was access to the towers shortly beforehand. Maintenance and so on. Well, we know that the one tower, apparently there was access to elevators being shut off and made for maintenance in both towers. There's one more research that needs to be done. Of course, it's hard to get the records of these maintenance.
They're all exploded.
Weren't they burned in 7?
Right? 7? What was the question?
Weren't they burned up in 7?
Oh, that's a good point. Building 7, of course, was not hit by a jet, and it collapsed 7 hours after the towers had collapsed. But there's some thought that the records for this planning were in Building 7 and were destroyed at that time.
Who manufactures thermite, and how do you go about purchasing it? Like, could you purchase some to do some experiments with?
Yeah, well, you can certainly buy aluminum powder, and it's just aluminum powder and iron oxide. That's one of the nice things about this is that the organic explosives have taggants in them, so that you can see that this is an organic explosive that went on. But thermite is just aluminum oxide and finally and iron. It is available commercially. This super thermite is available, but I don't know.
Is it made here in the USA?
Yeah, and also other countries. Canada is a big producer.
Do you have to have a special license to purchase it?
I don't know. It's a good question.
You have to have a clearance for it.
It would be nice to know if someone bought a large quantity of this stuff.
I'm leading on to that. Like,
Yeah.
is there a way to locate a big purchase of it?
I mean, there's other more direct, and to me, well, let's see. Let me just, the science is fascinating, but that will be available on the web, I hope, soon too, so that you can get some more details. And as I learn things, I'm sticking in my paper. So, we're up to draft 5.8, that's why. However, I'll probably have to start doing another paper, because that version finally is going to be published. And so that kind of fixes it,
Jones, can I ask a question? Yeah. Rumor, and I don't know where this came from, but that you were seeking metal from the collapse.
Yes, that's true.
Have you been able to obtain it?
Yes, we do have a sample of the solidified, previously molten metal from the South Tower, and we are proceeding with testing. The testing isn't complete. Jeff Farrer is helping on that, actually.
Is it the real thing?
This is one of the problems. It's not like the...
Now they know your intent. Why would they give you...
It wasn't they.
Gunpowder for the bullet.
Did you have a source to get that?
Yeah. There's a fellow who works with 911truth.org, another great group, by the way. They're a great group of people. And anyway, Mike went out to New York and had contacts where he was able to get that. Basically what we're doing is archaeology that's only
minutes old.
9 years old. 4.5 years old, But it's a little tricky because there is resistance to releasing these. And one of the, if you notice on the ST911, the Scholars for Truth 911, ST911.org, we have a petition which I'd encourage you to sign. It's up to about 7,000. We've asked for a sample from the slag, that I call it the solidified molten metal that's officially was gathered and sequestered, and it's saved now at a hangar at JFK Airport. We would also like to test that. It's rusty, so we know there's a lot of iron in it. But without analyzing it, we can't determine for sure yet the origin. But we did get another sample, but so far we have not had a lot of cooperation. I've written to guys that Professor Barnett and Sisson and Cahill. Two of them did not respond at all. One of them sent me some information, but it's not what I asked for. So, I'm just...
Well, what if you're
Let's try here then.
Is it true that unless you sample it yourself, you can be fed to almost anything?
What's that now?
Well, in geology,
once we sample it?
Unless you sample it yourself from the source, it can be suspect.
This is one of the problems, that's true, and that's why we ask for our own access to this. It's a huge, you've seen the photograph sample, it must be 5 or 6 feet long.
Can you prove thermite then?
There's a good possibility we could if we get access to this material. I mean, the evidence, we already have this molten metal, pouring out of the building. It's yellow, white hot, and we have other evidences as well. But this would clinch it, yes. It's just not a lot of cooperation.
Has your life been threatened? And do you fear for your safety?
Well, my wife does, but I mentioned my career was threatened by this fellow who's writing the administration and me, saying, and of course then I didn't respond to that favorably, so he then presented me with this grant. He said it'd be a large grant from Homeland Security, and I can be sure and get that to you.
Is he church related, this guy?
I'm not sure, actually, if he's LDS or anything. I don't know.
So they would control the study?
Yeah, well, they grant you the money.
You could buy anything in the world with money.
Nephi was offered.
Not Dr. Jones.
Nephi was offered money too, as he was talking about these things, and so was Abinadi and others. Did I miss a question?
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of your main arguments is the amount of time that a building takes to free fall, and comparing that with the.
Well, I do talk about that for Building 7. Let me just jump right in on that.
Yeah.
Okay. In my paper, I emphasized the free fall time of Building 7. The tower's free fall time has been studied by Professor Judy Wood at Clemson University. She is a mechanical engineering professor. And last fall, she wrote to me an email more recently, but she said, I read your papers, agree with you. She started doing studies, but she didn't disclose her activity. And then lately, she said, well, I guess it's time to speak out, because I'm more worried about my country than my job. There's a sad part to that story, which I might get into later, but she hasn't lost her job, but anyway, her study on the time of collapse of the towers is very good, and she makes some reasonable assumptions and graphs and detail, and much more than I have done. So I don't plan to pursue that.
Do you remember her numbers? It was like 30 seconds.
30 seconds minimum, and 80 seconds is more. So she has a range depending on assumptions. One of the problems is that.
And it fell in 10, right?
It fell in about 10 to 15 seconds, 15. Each of the two.
And it should be
she shows the data for that too. So 30 to 80.
Okay.
Anyway, you can read. Her site is if you Google on Jane Doe, WTC. That's the name of her site, Jane Doe or something. And so did I pretty much. That was about the free fall. So let's go on.
I just wonder, do you think 9/11 was funded by the American people supporting their credit money system?
Wow. That's a tough question.
Yes.
Let me think. What do I think about that? This is not at BYU. But we're not. This is just a private group. So let me tell you what I think. The the first clue as to who is involved, I think, is there's solid evidence for trading just in the few trading days before 9/11. Most of you have heard about this, I think. It was in the mainline press at first because they thought, oh, Al-Qaeda, it looks like, is trading, cashed in on this. It was billions of dollars, estimated 15 billion made on these trades. So these are put options, which means if the stock goes down, you make money. And these were put options on United and American Airlines, the two airlines involved in the hijackings. And of course, their stocks dropped by about half immediately as they reopened the markets. And whoever did these put options made billions, not just those two airlines. So they're also the insurers of these buildings, put options on those insurers, that made a lot of money there. And then regular trades, the stock goes up, you make money on Raytheon and some other military companies in the United States. So the first thing I would say is let's trace these people. By the way, the 9/11 Commission, who has the book by the 9/11 Commission? Oh, you hold that up just so. There's a 9/11 Commission report. You'll see, I don't remember the page number, but it's in a footnote. They talk about these trades, and what they say is, okay, SEC studied this out, and they're not naming names, but they say, we determined that it was not connected with Al-Qaeda, and therefore it's innocent, it's innocuous. What's there to worry about? You see what I'm saying? Can you see the mindset that would lead you? And it's in there. I mean, I quoted in my paper.
Well, leave so innocent, can't they share those names with us?
Yeah, right. Well, I actually have that ready for tomorrow if someone asks the right question like this. There's a lot going on with our economy, which is, I really think, because of the debt, the national debt, it's over $8 trillion now, and it's grown by about 30% since Bush took office, just in 5 years.
We're going to grow almost $1 trillion. Yeah. 0.9 trillion this year.
Now, a lot of people are worried about the national debt. My parents, even, staunch Republicans, are worried about this national debt growing enormously. And the economy, and not only national debt, but debt in the country. It's, the total debt in the country is around 34 trillion, the last I checked. And does anybody have a better?
That's close. It's close.
It's close. And the gross domestic product is around 11 trillion. So we are the greatest debtor nation in the world by considerable. Now, what's supporting our? So I'm going to come back to what's supporting our dollar at this time, despite all this debt, is the fact that oil is purchased only in dollars. So it's like the Constitution calls for a gold standard. We got off that, unfortunately, gold and silver. But we are on effectively an oil standard because oil can only be purchased in dollars. And that was set up by Kissinger in the 70s. I don't know why people agreed to it, but they did. Now, Iraq said we're going to start selling oil in euros. Shortly thereafter, the United States attacked Iraq. Iran announced several months ago that they were going to start selling their oil in euros. Venezuela. And then we started warning that we might have to attack Iran for some reason, like they might eventually get nuclear weapons. But I don't think that war is going to happen imminently because Iran backed off. They said we won't sell our oil in euros. They backed off. Yes, they did. That was not in the mainstream. But other European countries have more news coverage of this type of thing.
Watch BBC News.
Which one?
BBC News is
BBC is actually pretty good.
Lou Dobbs is great.
Yeah.
Barbara Jean's great.
By the way, we sent warships off the coast of Venezuela too, to sort of warn them that they were talking about selling oil in euros. I think that's a big fact that we have to remember is that they being administration is. I mean, there's concern about our economy, which is not disclosed to the public, but to use warships and threatening war to preserve our economy is just it's not right.
Hey, the Rockefellers don't like that Euro stuff.
No. But anyway, Chris.
Supposedly, I heard there was like a figure in multiple $trillion that was some reported unaccounted for
Yes.
in the government budget.
Pentagon,
2 days before
there's
9/11.
the Pentagon. The day before 9/11, Rumsfeld announced that we can't find it was 2.3 trillion, if I remember the number.
How much?
I saw
2.3 trillion.
in the hearing, they blamed it on the computer systems.
Yeah, 2.3 trillion missing in the Pentagon budget. We don't know where it was, and that would have been major news. But the next day is 9/11, and that's been just basically forgotten. That's a good point.
The planes that did not fly on 9/11 that normally flew for protecting this.
Now you're talking about the military jets that ordinarily escort hijacked planes. This is another very important fact, and that was in the mainstream press for a short while. Again, where's our military? This is a multi-trillion-dollar system that we have. That's where the 2.3 trillion. We know about. But anyway, so we routinely before 9/11. The jets were up there, I think it was 67 times that year, if I remember the number. So that's like 52, more than once a week, where we send up a jet to escort a plane. It takes 5 to 10 minutes, depending on where you are. In D.C., it's less than 5 minutes to scramble a jet and escort. That doesn't mean you shoot them down. It means you escort them, and there's a graduated approach to get them to land, is what they try to do. So anyway, on 9/11, there were no escorts, no scrambled jets, and at the Pentagon they said they finally scrambled it, it was too late. Now, between the time the first tower was hit and the Pentagon was hit was a period of about an hour and 20 minutes. It's on a slide that I have, but that's roughly. There's plenty of time. Now here's a key point there. In the bunker beneath the White House, you have Cheney in charge. Remember, Bush was off in Florida, another story. And he's up in the plane now for safety, whatever. But Cheney's in charge, basically, in the underground bunker. And Secretary Mineta, bless his heart for his honesty, and he's being asked by the 9/11 Commission what happened down there. He says, well, this young man would come in and talk to Cheney as this plane was approaching the Pentagon. The young man said, the plane is 50 miles out. Do the orders still stand? Cheney said, yes. The young man goes on. The young man comes back. The plane is 20 miles out. Do the orders still stand? Getting a little worried here. Cheney says, yes. The young man comes back and says, and this is Mineta testifying to the 9/11 Commission. The young man says, the plane is 10 miles out. Do the orders still stand? Cheney whipped around and he said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Leave me alone. But he was angry that this young man would keep. Now, what orders, by the way, 50 miles out is plenty of time to scramble a jet and do whatever you have to prevent this jet from entering Washington, D.C. airspace. Obviously, there was nothing scrambled that did that. And therefore, the orders were not to scramble the jet. They were to not scramble the jet. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. I would like to know, this is one of the things on our ST 9/11 Scholars for Truth 9/11 petition. We want to have Mineta explain a little more, and also we want to hear from this young man, and also Cheney, if we could. Under oath, finally. Maybe not, but the young man might, time is passing. Okay, so let me say real quickly then, so what did the 9/11 Commission do? Did they ask these questions? Well, what are these orders? I mean, that's my first question. What are these orders? They did not ask that question. Is it in the 9/11 Commission report? No. They did not put it in the report. It was televised, I think C-SPAN or something, and it was captured, and we have that testimony, but it's not in the 9/11 Commission report at this time. So we're getting a little late, but... Is
Senator Hatch or Senator Bennett aware of your stand?
I expect I have this petition, which now has about 7,000 signatures, I have sent them copies to all our congressmen in Utah, but I haven't heard back one word. Go here and then Sean.
Okay, this is a little different subject. Sean, help me out on this. Earlier, you mentioned that you hope that some people internal, like Mineta, will come forth and start talking.
And apparently
about what
he's
they know.
trying to, but...
Well, just today, Scooter Libby testified in his hearing that CIA leak that's been this big scandal to Bush, he said Bush authorized it, and Cheney told him to go do it. So that's starting to come out. That's going to be interesting to follow. But Sean, help me on this. The chief of staff of Senator Bob Dole, have you heard about that?
No.
Okay, Bob Dole is a very powerful senator, and he ran for president. Okay, so he had a chief of staff run his organization. That man, what's his name, Sean?
Oh, it just
Isn't it Vincent? Isn't that his
no,
last name?
I don't think so. That doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, I don't remember his name. We'll get it to Brian. Brian can get it to everybody. But the chief of staff of Bob Dole has filed a $7 billion lawsuit naming George Bush, Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Wolfowitz, Tenet, as that Bush gave the order for the 9/11 attack. He wasn't just there watching it happen and capitalizing. This guy claims Bush gave the order, and he has sources within the military that will testify under oath. And he's already filed the lawsuit, and it's in behalf of hundreds of the survivors of 9/11. Interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what happens about it.
And he was ordered by John Ashcroft to cut the lawsuit
to stop it. But he's going to have to.
Well, see, now, this would be interesting where if we have this, if we can get on this forum of Brian's, we can get URLs, we can start looking at and discussing these things. Sean,
it's on the Alex Jones website. He interviewed him for about 40 minutes.
Infowars.com.
I just have one brief comment on the thing, and then a question on the monetary. It's interesting to look in the teachings of Ezra Taft Benson in the index. If you look in fiscal policy, he expounds on the fact that our fiscal policy we're running to the point where foreign investors who hold our dollars by the untold vast amounts.
And studying this and seeing the physics of the collapse of Building 7 in particular. Dallin, were you there in September? I don't think I did. At the BYU thing?
No.
I didn't think I cited it, but it was kind of fun. But anyway, when I first started studying this, it was hard to sleep for a couple nights. Because I thought, man, we really, it seems like we must have, I don't know who it is yet, but there's some sort of secret combination of faction. It doesn't have to be real big, but just like the Book of Mormon's talking about, in our government now. Which means the Constitution is hanging by a thread, because that's what the Constitution is designed to do, is to prevent dictators or power-seeker factions. And yet they seem to have gained enough ascendancy to do an inside demolition on these buildings. So I couldn't sleep for a while. But then it's like 2 nights I had trouble sleeping. It's all because as I started thinking about this and praying about it and realizing, well, it's in the Book of Mormon. This is what happened in Nephi's day. Helaman 6, it's exactly like that. They had terrorists outside and inside their government. And he warned the people. Did they change right away? No. So what happened next? Let's just trace the history just for a minute. So what happened? So he warns them. The warning went out. Do you remember what happened next?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, they thought that they were very righteous people.
They did think that they were.
When those men fell dead, as if, because they saw that he was really dead, they thought, oh, we're so righteous that the Lord conquered the killers for us.
Right.
So they thought they were righteous people.
They were smug. There's a quote here about being in a cocoon at the last conference. You should notice on the brethren. It's on here. A lot of people live in a kind of a cocoon of self-deception to disclose some of this. Now, there are people who are trying to do this at the government level. Kurt Welton, and I'm just going to talk along here as things come to mind, you see, as best I can. But It's not anything I've organized. Kurt Weldon is actually a Republican out of Pennsylvania. He's heading up the Able Danger investigation, which is an investigation of the foreknowledge in our intelligence agencies about these hijackers and which I think were patsies, but nevertheless, that means someone set up to do something, and so they could be blamed. The operation would be blamed on Muslims, basically. But anyway, he is pursuing that, and he was recently, was it just last week, I think, in a town hall meeting back east, and he was asked, well, what about 9/11? He says, I've read Professor Jones's report. I thought that was kind of funny. Or maybe it was my talk at UBSC, which, thank goodness we still have the internet, so we have this spreading, that way. That's hard to stop. But there's a good man that we can support, Kurt Weldon, and he is actually conducting investigations on the foreknowledge of the administration, and not just this administration, it apparently goes back at least to the previous administration, and about these the plans to attack, like you said, a Reichstag. Who said that?
Sean.
You know the history, most of us, many of us do, how Hitler used an attack on his own people and blamed it on, Poland, for one, and then they were able to get the German people angry enough to attack Poland and so on. So, and there's a story like that in the Book of Mormon too. This is called the false flag operation. And as people get to know about false flag operations, it opens them up to considering what we're trying to say about 9/11, what many of us are trying to say. And I just want to point out Malachi. It's a great story, but it's a history. And so these quotes that I put together here. You have, let's see, how was that? Malachi wanted to be the king of the Lamanites, remember? And so he got to be the leader of the army, devious methods. And then he sends his servants up to the king of the Lamanites, and they kneel down, or bow down. And then one of his servants, obviously under orders from Malachi, what did he do? Kill the king. Right there it is. Kill the king. And who did they blame it on? The king's servants. And as soon as they started shouting and blaming it on the king's servants, well, they took off. And they ran over to the land of Jershon, and so pretty quick, Malachi says, well, go after them, and they're too far ahead, and they didn't catch them. And so pretty quick then, by blaming this on these servants of the king who went to the land of Jershon, Malachi was able to become the king, and he even married the queen and convinced her of this lie, which was, a false flag, you see, blaming it on someone else. And then he was able to rally the Lamanites to attack the Nephites, and in particular the people of Jershon. So we have that history. And remember, the Book of Mormon is written for us. And as we read it, we should ask ourselves, why is this in the Book of Mormon? Okay, so I said a bunch of things. The Book of Mormon has been just a great comfort to me, though, I must say, in all of this. As I first started reading this, but then later he said, I had contacts with Homeland Security and with...
pedophiles, you mean?
And he said, I could get you a very good grant. I could get you a very good grant and that sounded pretty attractive. And he has contacts with national labs. I don't doubt that he did. He seemed fairly well versed, but I won't obviously talk too much about his name, but it wouldn't do any good. But he even gave me an idea of what this proposal would look like. But he said in order to get it, it would really be important if I changed direction in my research. So there is an element there that's quite interesting. And
are you saying they would pay you well?
Yeah, well, that's right. Oh, and so this reminds me, and I just fit in with Nephi. I'm talking about the son of Helaman. And he was, as he stood on his tower, or I guess he was kneeling, but he prayed, and the people gathered around him. Well, what is going on? What's bothering you? And so he said, well, as you read in Helaman 6 and 7, and there he said, well, there's these Gadian robbers, and they're not just out there, people. They were out there, but they're also in our government, and one of them has killed another one, the head of our government. And if you go check, you'll find evidence and, the story. And finally, one of them confessed, which I think is really, there's evidence that we can bring forth. And I've had a small part in that with a number of others. But there, finally, I think the example of the Book of Mormon is that we should pray for is that there will be someone with courage who has inside information to I think a lot of us sense that, don't we? A lot of people in the country sense there's something wrong. Not quite sure if we can put the finger on it yet for many people, but and then there's the sense that we need to stand up and do something. Dallin, we missed you. Do you want to?
I'm Dallin Durfee in the physics department. I'm just here to listen.
Dallin's a physics professor at BYU, and glad you could come. I'm going to stand over here, and I'll try to respond to a few things. But which first name again? Scott said about getting to know each other. You see, that is really helpful, and to me, and I'm sure to all of us. And Brian, as we get that email system going, perhaps a forum at some time will become...
I have a forum on my
Oh, you
website.
have a forum. Would you let us know about that in your...
His websites are excellent.
Yeah. And so if you've signed up that list or if you email to Brian, then I think that would be a great thing already for us to communicate that way, full of Jesus Christ. So you're not following me, you're following Jesus, okay? and we're all, I hope, in that same vein. And I follow Nephi, son of Helaman. His example means a lot to me right now. I've thought about it a lot. I've had a threat to my career from a fairly prominent, outspoken fellow, San Francisco Bay Area, who emailed me and others administration at BYU. And he said very plainly, he said, no, he didn't say my career, he said, no one person's career is as important as what's at stake here, which he didn't define. But he was criticizing my work, and so that was fine scientifically. But then I responded to him, you see, to his critiques.